This is Nick Taylor of Sports Times Network alongside my website partner Dan Harrelson live at the 2010 SEC Football Media Days, and in continuation of our series, Women in the Sports Media, we are with ESPN's Cara Capuano. How you doing this afternoon, Cara?
I'm doing well, and perfect pronunciation of my name.
I tell you what, I used to be a fan, still am, so it's great to be with you, Cara. Well, I tell you what, talk about the contract with ESPN and the SEC and the opportunities it's given you as a reporter and the different things you're involved in with the SEC and ESPN.
Well, obviously, it's one of the hallmark deals in all of sports television, and I was very excited to be a part of it. There was a large amount of people, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes, that were hired as a part of the extra programming that was born of the 15-year contract between the SEC and ESPN, and certainly I'm in that group. And, to work is one thing in this field. That's wonderful in and of itself. To cover the Southeastern Conference takes what's already a joy of a career and I think sends it to the next level. My first year covering the SEC, it couldn't have gone any better. I loved every moment. I do this because I'm a sports fan, and what better league to be able to watch and cover and form relationships with than the Southeastern Conference. It's been great.
Absolutely.
Well, talk about what you do throughout the week leading into game day, the preparation for each game. Talk about that.
Well, I have a very interesting role because it's diverse. I do both studio work with the Southeastern Conference on ESPNU, and then as well I cover the live remote events, sideline reporting for football, and then doing play-by-play for both women's basketball and also softball. And so really my year, the only consistent piece is our show, SEC Weekly, and for that show I work with a group and that's based out of Tulsa, actually, interestingly enough, and we look for some of the best feature stories and reporting, and we gather kind of those biopics or specialty stories about the conference that aren't necessarily what's happening on the field, but rather what's happening to the student athletes around what they do on the field. We cover their academic performance. We cover all of the Olympic sports, not just the big ones that get the best TV. So, for that role, I pretty much just work with those guys, write the script, host the show, do phone interviews, talk to analysts, that kind of thing. It's very studio specific. Going into a football game, Wednesday or Thursday, we'll start talking to visiting coaches and players, start reading game notes, and then Friday we get to meet with the home coaches and the players, and then, of course, Saturday is game day, and there's nothing like game day in the SEC.
Well, being a woman reporter and being on camera a lot, this is a two-part question. Do you often feel like people judge you and they look at you and say, oh, she's an attractive woman? Do you feel like sometimes you have to prove to people that you can do a great job in your career? I mean, how do you balance, the physical aspect of, how people may view you versus how you do on the job? I mean, career-wise, it seems like it may be a challenge somewhat.
I think that anybody that's on television, whether they're a man or a woman, thinks about that physical aspect of it. Obviously, I've seen men do better jobs with their makeup than I can do. So, the physical aspect is important if you're in front of the camera, certainly. I think that I got into this industry as a woman who maybe didn't have a lot of women that she identified with. I wanted to be a women's sportscaster who wasn't always the best athlete or didn't have that former athlete signature to her name, but really was just the best fan. I wanted to be the kind of person that people felt like, they could sit down and pop some popcorn and have some soda and watch a game with and enjoy that experience and talk as if they're talking with their buddies. I try to be the voice of the fan, and I hope that they're more interested in what I'm saying and listening to me than looking at me.
Were you a former athlete?
Actually, that's an interesting story. Yvette Girard, the LSU softball coach, when I ran into her at the SEC championship, took one look at me and said, Cara, did you play? And of course she was referring to softball. And yes, Coach, I did play slow pitch up through middle school, but when I got into high school, I did the fast pitch thing I hadn't really trained at when I was young. I played everything right up until the high school level, and then I was a little bit too short and a little bit too slow to compete at my large high school and varsity athletics. So I was on the tall flag team, actually. I was on a spirit squad. And so I'm just a big fan at heart.
Well, give people a little bit of a personal side of you. Where are you from? What's the deal with your family? Where'd you grow up? That type of thing. Where'd you go to school? A little bit of background about who you are.
I'm from Southern California, and I know that initially some of the SEC fans got wind of that, and they were a little bit resistant to me because as we say, in these parts, I'm not from these parts. But I love these parts. I love this conference and the fans and the passion and the energy. It's unlike anything I experienced growing up at a college level. In Southern California, I saw this kind of engagement from the fan base for teams like the Dodgers and the Lakers, and when I was young, the Raiders of the NFL were in LA. I went to UC San Diego. I was a biochemistry and cell biology major. I chose UCLA over Stanford for graduate school because in the back of my mind, my other dream, other than being a college professor in biology, was to be on TV. And I thought, well, if I'm going to quit grad school, I better be in Los Angeles instead of in Palo Alto, California, because there will be more TV opportunities.
UCLA Medical Center is pretty well known out there.
Yeah, it is. Pretty well known. And so that I did make that choice to get into TV, and so I'm just a science geek turned sports addict that made a living with it.
A lot of people cover one thing or do one show or cover even one sport. But with you having those diverse roles, how difficult is your schedule? And do you sometimes feel like, hey, I'm about to go on the air and I hope I'm prepared, I hope I do well? Do you often kind of have a helter-skelter feeling at times?
It's an interesting question. I think that because I was always a student and a student of the game, I've translated that to the job, and the one thing that I really pride myself on is my preparation. Right. So I'm not somebody that ever really goes into it worrying, even if it's something that I've covered for a first time. I'm a bookworm and a nerd, and I make a million notes, and I make sure that I'm really buttoned up before I go into the environment so that I don't have that anxiety. I don't do well in anxiety. I do better with preparation.
Exactly.
I guess one last question. Me and Nick predicted Alabama to beat Georgia for the 2010 SEC Championship game. Any thoughts on what may pan out on the east and the west side?
Well, I think that Alabama and Florida, until otherwise proven, are still the favorites in their respective divisions. I think that the fan bases for both the Gators and the Crimson Tide would love to see those two Part 3 in a duel in Atlanta. I'm not a big prediction person. I think that the West is Alabama's to lose, and I think that the East is Florida's to lose until some other team can show up and say, we're here to win it.
Right.
Well, Cara, it was great being with you today. We hope to keep in touch in the future. Thank you very much. Very professional.
Thank you. Thanks.